All right, so diving right in, it seems like we've all been thinking about honor codes lately,
Yeah, seems like it.
and particularly how they play out in all these different situations.
Different contexts, definitely.
Exactly, different contexts.
Mhm.
And get this, one of you sent in some information about a police department,
Okay.
and the motto on their patrol cars is, get this, honor, service, integrity.
Wow.
But but there's no like actual written honor code for the officers.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And to make it even more, I don't know, fascinating, thought-provoking, they're not really known for doing a lot of community outreach.
Huh. So that really does make you think about what those words on the car even mean, right? I mean, is it just for show, or are they actually committed to honor, to service, to integrity?
Exactly. It's like, what are those words actually worth? And then on top of that, we also got this news story about the West Point cheating scandal.
Oh, right.
51 cadets caught cheating on a calculus exam. Yeah, calculus. It's almost ironic. I mean, West Point is like the institution built on this super strict honor code.
Yeah. I mean, that case really shows how even in a place that's like supposed to be all about honor, all about integrity, people still make bad choices.
They crack under pressure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about the pressure those cadets are under.
To succeed, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, which leads to the question, are honor codes even? Like, are they enough?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if even West Point cadets with their whole honor system are breaking down, what happens in situations where there's not even a written code, like that police department?
I mean, it makes you think. A written code's just the first step, right? The real test is whether people actually believe in those values. Do they guide how they act, even when nobody's watching?
Right. Like, are you walking the walk, not just talking the talk? And it makes me think of another scandal, the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget?
I mean, teachers, administrators, all under this immense pressure to get those test scores up.
Yeah.
And they end up, like, orchestrating this huge cheating scheme.
Yeah. And that just shows how focusing only on the outcome, like those test scores, can create this whole culture of, dishonesty.
Where people feel like they have to cheat to succeed.
Exactly.
Like the ends justify the means no matter what.
And it makes you wonder how we measure success, right? If it's just about hitting a certain target, well, people will find a way, even if it means cutting corners.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we've got these cases where pressure leads to bad decisions, to people compromising their morals. But you also sent in a couple of TED Talks.
Yeah, I did.
And they offer this, I don't know, like a different perspective on how to actually create a culture of integrity.
Right. Especially within law enforcement, which is what we've been, focusing on.
Exactly. So there's one from Renee Mitchell, who is, she's a police officer, and she's a big advocate for this thing called evidence-based policing.
Right. It's all about making decisions based on actual evidence, not just hunches or biases.
Exactly.
And she actually shares this really powerful story about how sometimes focusing just on arrests, just on getting those numbers up, can actually have, like, terrible consequences.
Yeah. She talks about this man named Dwayne.
Right.
And he was arrested, wrongly arrested, actually.
And it was because of pressure from her supervisor.
Yeah, her supervisor was pushing for more arrests, so she felt like this pressure to just arrest somebody, anybody, even if the evidence wasn't really there.
And the thing is, Dwayne was totally innocent.
Right. And the worst part, he ended up taking his own life just days later.
It's a tragic story. And it really highlights the need for a system that focuses on justice, on fairness, not just on racking up arrests.
Exactly. It's like, what are we really trying to achieve here? Are we actually serving the community, or are we just trying to meet some arbitrary quota?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are we actually building trust with the community, or are we breaking it down? I mean, think about the impact on Dwayne's family, on his friends. It's devastating.
And it makes you realize how important it is to consider the human cost of these actions. It's not just about numbers, it's about people's lives. And it connects to that other TED Talk you sent in, the one from Chip Huff.
Oh, yes, Chip Huff.
He's also a police officer, but his whole approach is about changing the way police officers think.
He believes in seeing people as people, first and foremost, not just as potential criminals or problems to be solved.
Right. And he talks about how this shift in mindset can dramatically improve how the police interact with the community and lead to fewer complaints, better outcomes, all around better relationships.
He actually has some amazing stories about how his SWAT team in Kansas City put this idea into practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, instead of automatically shooting aggressive dogs during raids, they brought in a dog expert to teach them, like, de-escalation techniques.
Wow. So instead of just resorting to lethal force, they tried to find a more humane solution.
Exactly. And you know what? They actually saw an 80% reduction in the number of dogs that had to be shot.
That's incredible. It shows how a little bit of empathy and creative problem solving can go a long way.
Absolutely. And it all goes back to what we were saying earlier about internalizing those values, right? If you genuinely see the people you're interacting with as individuals, as human beings worthy of respect, your actions are going to reflect that.
Right. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, even in those really tense situations.
Exactly.
And he also tells this story about how a couple of officers noticed that the patrol wagons, the back of them, would get super hot in the summer.
Oh, yeah.
Unbearably hot. And instead of just, ignoring it, they actually used their own money to buy PVC pipe and duct tape.
To rig up a makeshift air conditioning system.
Yeah, just to try and make things a little more comfortable for the people they were transporting.
Such a small act of kindness, but it really shows how much they cared about the well-being of those individuals. It's about recognizing their basic dignity.
Exactly. It's like those little things, those small gestures can actually make a big difference in how people perceive the police.
They can help build trust.
Exactly. So we've got these examples of how pressure can lead to, to bad decisions, to ethical lapses. But we also have these, these glimmers of hope, these individuals who are challenging the way things are done and showing that it is possible to act with integrity, even in difficult circumstances.
It's inspiring, for sure.
It is inspiring, but it also begs the question, how do we make this the norm? How do we create systems and cultures where ethical behavior is supported even when the pressure's on?
Well, that classic psychology study, the Milgram experiment.
Oh, yeah, with the electric shocks.
Yeah. It's scary to think about, but it really shows how easily people can, surrender their own judgment when an authority figure tells them to do something. Right. Even if they know it's wrong. And that has some pretty disturbing implications for law enforcement, don't you think? I mean, if officers aren't trained to, really think critically about orders and to follow their conscience, they could end up just blindly following authority, even if it means doing something wrong.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And it's not just about, blind obedience. Remember that Stanford prison experiment?
Oh, yeah, the one where they, took those college students and made some of them guards and some of them prisoners?
Right. And they turned, totally brutal.
It's wild how quickly those students, I mean, they were just regular college kids, how fast they turned into abusive guards just because they had the power,
It's kind of terrifying. And it makes you think about those systems of power, right?
Yeah.
And how easily, how easily things can get out of control.
Absolutely. I mean, both those experiments, the Milgram one and the Stanford one, they show how much our behavior is influenced by the situation we're in and the roles we're assigned.
Yeah. It's like anyone's capable of doing bad things given the right or, I guess, wrong circumstances.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how we prevent that from happening, especially, in places like law enforcement where the stakes are so high.
Right. Well, that's where this guy, Ryan Deutsch, comes in.
Oh, yeah.
He had those emails. He's the one who emailed Dane Deutsch. And he seems to really believe in honor codes.
Yeah.
But he's also saying they need to be more than just words on a page,
Yeah, he's saying they have to be practical.
Right. You can't just tell people, be honorable and expect that to be enough.
No, you got to prepare them for those real-life ethical dilemmas. Give them tools to make good decisions, especially when they're under pressure.
Exactly. And he uses that Stingray technology as an example. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah. It's basically a device that mimics a cell phone tower, and it tricks phones in the area into connecting to it. So law enforcement can track people's locations and intercept their communications.
Wow. It's kind of like super invasive surveillance.
Yeah, pretty much. And Danucci's saying that some officers are using it illegally, without getting warrants first.
Whoa. Why?
He thinks it's because they're feeling the pressure to get results, to solve crimes no matter what.
So it's that whole ends justify the means thing again?
Yeah, even if it means breaking the law.
So how do we make sure that officers or anyone in a position of authority don't fall into that trap? I mean, besides, telling them not to.
Well, Danucci suggests that that police training needs to incorporate more real-world scenarios. Like, imagine you're an officer and you see your partner using the stingray illegally. What do you do?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one.
Right. But it forces you to actually think through those situations, to weigh the different options and their potential consequences before you're actually in that situation.
So you're kind of like mentally prepared.
Exactly. And Deutsch also recommends studying historical examples of unethical authority.
Like the Milgram and Stanford experiments.
Yeah, those are perfect examples, but there are tons of others. It's all about learning from those past mistakes and trying to avoid making the same ones.
Right. Recognizing those patterns of behavior that can lead to ethical lapses. And then, of course, Deutsch really emphasizes having a strong honor code, but not just some generic one.
He's saying it needs to be specific to that department's work. Like, what are the unique challenges officers face in that community? What are the situations they're likely to encounter?
So it's not just this, like, vague set of ideals.
Right. It has to be practical.
Okay, but even with a really great, well-written honor code, how do you actually make sure it, like, sticks? How do you make sure people actually follow it?
Well, that's where leadership comes in.
Okay.
Leaders need to set the tone. Like, they have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right, so they have to model that ethical behavior themselves.
Exactly. And they also have to create an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something wrong.
Which reminds me of that Atlanta public school scandal again. I mean, the teachers there, they knew that cheating was going on, but they were afraid to say anything because they were worried about the consequences.
Yeah. They felt like they couldn't challenge those in power.
Yeah.
And that culture of silence allowed that whole thing to fester and grow.
So it's not just about punishing bad behavior. It's about creating a culture where people feel safe coming forward, where they know that doing the right thing is more important than, hitting some arbitrary target.
Exactly. It's about valuing integrity. And I think it starts with open communication. Leaders need to be willing to listen to their people, even when it's uncomfortable.
Right. And they need to make it clear that there will be consequences for unethical behavior.
Yeah, and those consequences need to be applied consistently, regardless of someone's rank or position. Otherwise, it just breeds cynicism and distrust.
And speaking of trust, I mean, one of the main points Renee Mitchell made in her TED Talk was about the importance of building trust between law enforcement and the community.
Right. She believes that that evidence-based policing is crucial for that because it ensures that decisions are being made fairly, based on actual facts, not just hunches or biases.
So it's about transparency.
Yeah, and it's about accountability.
Okay. And she also talked about the need to listen to the community, like to actually hear their concerns and try to understand their perspective.
Right. It's about building relationships based on respect and mutual understanding.
And it makes me think about Chip Huff again and his whole philosophy of seeing people as people. I mean, if police officers approach every interaction with that mindset, it could completely change the dynamic, make those encounters less adversarial.
Yeah. And it all comes back to that idea of recognizing the shared humanity in every interaction, even in those high-stress situations where tensions are running high.
And those little acts of kindness, like, making the patrol wagons more comfortable, those things can actually go a long way in building trust.
Absolutely. They show that you care.
So we've talked about the pressure to achieve results, the need for good training and ethical leadership, and the power of mindset.
Yeah.
But how do we actually implement these changes? I mean, how do we take these ideas and turn them into, like, concrete action?
Well, I think a good starting point is Deutsch's suggestions.
Yeah.
In incorporating those real-world scenarios into training, studying historical examples of ethical failures, and developing those strong department-specific honor codes.
Right, but it also seems like it requires a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about success and leadership.
It does. It's about moving away from that purely transactional approach to leadership, where it's just about achieving those metrics, hitting those targets no matter what.
Right.
And instead embracing a more transformational approach where the focus is on developing people, on fostering trust, on creating a shared sense of purpose.
So it's not just about giving orders and expecting people to follow them blindly.
No, it's about inspiring people, about giving them the tools and the support they need to make good decisions, about creating an environment where they can thrive.
And that requires a different set of skills.
Yeah. It requires leaders who are not only competent, but also compassionate, who not only have technical expertise, but also, emotional intelligence. They need to be able to connect with people on a human level, to understand their motivations, to build those relationships based on mutual respect.
It sounds like a tall order. But it's also incredibly inspiring. I
Mm.
mean, if we can actually cultivate that kind of leadership, imagine the impact it could have not just on law enforcement, but on society as a whole.
It would be transformative. It would mean creating organizations that are not only effective, but also ethical, places where people feel valued and respected, and where the pursuit of success is always balanced with a commitment to doing the right thing.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot, haven't we? Pressure, training, leadership, mindset. But then there's this whole other thing. Danucci brought up technology.
Yeah, how tech is changing the game. The whole ethics thing gets even more complicated, doesn't it?
Way more complicated. Like he mentioned flock safety and Placer.ai.
Right. Those systems are being used for surveillance, and it's not always clear what the rules are or who's making sure things are being done right.
It's kind of creepy, right? All those license plate readers and location tracking apps, it feels like we're constantly being watched.
Yeah, the whole Big Brother thing. And it's not just the government either.
Right.
Private companies are collecting tons of data about us, and we often don't even know how they're using it or who they're selling it to.
Exactly. It makes you think about privacy, right? And how much of it we're willing to give up.
It's tricky. We often trade a little privacy for convenience or for a sense of security, but then it's like, where do you draw the line?
Right. And Danucci even brought up those programs like Real ID and Clear.
Oh, yeah, the ones that use like biometric data, fingerprints, facial recognition, stuff like that.
Yeah, that stuff. And he's
Yeah.
worried about what could happen if that information gets into the wrong hands.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid concern.
And then there's AI. That's
Yeah.
a whole other can of worms, right?
Oh, yeah. Danucci seems pretty concerned about AI, especially in law enforcement. I mean, it has the potential to be really useful.
Right. But also potentially really dangerous.
Yeah,
Like, what if those algorithms are biased?
exactly. If they're trained on data that's already biased, they'll just perpetuate those biases, maybe even make them worse.
And that could have some pretty serious consequences.
Definitely. Think about things like facial recognition being used to identify suspects. If the algorithm is biased against certain racial groups, it could lead to wrongful arrests. Or even worse.
It's like a nightmare scenario from a sci-fi movie.
And then there are deepfakes.
Deepfakes.
Yeah, those videos where it looks like someone's saying or doing something they never actually did, all created with AI.
Wait, so you're telling me you can't even trust what you see with your own eyes anymore?
It's getting harder and harder to tell what's real and what's not.
This is crazy. So how do we even begin to prepare for a future where technology is this advanced, this powerful?
It's a challenge for sure. I mean, we're developing new technologies faster than we can figure out how to use them ethically.
It feels like we're kind of flying blind.
Danucci's email is a good reminder that we need to be more thoughtful about how we use these new tools. We need to ask tough questions about who benefits from them and what the potential risks are.
So what can we do? I mean, it feels kind of overwhelming.
Well, education is a big part of it. We need to teach people how to think critically about technology and its impact on society, how to spot biases, how to have these conversations about the ethical implications.
It's about being informed citizens, not just passive consumers.
Exactly. And we need to hold our leaders accountable, make sure they're putting in place safeguards to make sure technology is being used responsibly.
So it's not just about individual responsibility, it's about systemic change as well.
Right. We need to work together to make sure that technology is used for good, not for harm.
So we've come full circle, haven't we? We started with honor codes, and now we're talking about the ethics of technology. It seems like no matter what the context, leading with character is more important than ever.
Absolutely. We need to hold on to our values, to think critically, and to make choices that reflect our integrity.
Even when it's tough, even when the pressure's on.
Exactly. Because every decision we make, big or small, has an impact. And it's up to us to shape the world we want to live in.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
And I think the main takeaway is that we all have a role to play in building a more ethical future.
Absolutely. It's not someone else's problem, it's ours.
Right. We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We have to be proactive to engage in these conversations, to demand better from our leaders, and to hold ourselves accountable.
Well said.
So on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into honor, cheating, and leading with character.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, keep thinking critically, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep leading with character.